If you haven't already been confronted with the question, I can virtually guarantee at some point in your reading career, somebody is going to ask you, if you were stranded on a desert island, which books would you take? If you could only take one book or two books or 10 books, whatever. It's a question that every reader will get at some point in their career. And so I was thinking about this a lot over the last few days. Which books would I choose? Which books would I take with me onto a desert island if I could only choose, say, 10 books? So I started formulating my own answer, and I finally have the definitive list of the 10 books that I would take with me on my desert island. And in this thought experiment, all other books functionally disappear from me. I'm not allowed to ever read them again. I'm not getting off this island. It's not like I'm just going to be there for a week and then I can come back. These are the 10 books that I'm going to have to read and reread for the rest of my life. Now, I think strategically, you would think that I would just choose my top 10 books, but that isn't exactly what I did. What I did instead was I chose 10 books that I feel complement one another. There are many books that I absolutely adore, but they kind of overlap with other books, so I don't think that I would want two Jane Austen novels as an example, even if both of them might make my top 10. That's just an example. So what I did was I decided to choose books leaning on ones that fascinated me, that I think have great rereadability, ones that complement one another, ones that tend and skew a little bit longer, or at least the stories are substantive. Even if the book is amazing, if it's super short, am I going to want to read and reread that for all of eternity? These are the 10 books that I already know I could live with for the rest of my life. Not necessarily my top 10, but the books that overlap and really give me a balanced view, lighter books, heavier books, longer books, books that I feel really complement one another. Now, G.K. Chesterton famously said if he was stranded on an island, he would choose a guide to practical shipbuilding. So obviously that's the real answer. I would want books that would help me get off the island, but in this case, that is a little bit outside of the purview of the conversation. I think when he was given his serious answer, he said like the Pickwick Papers. So I think David Copperfield would be my favorite Dickens choice. But let's dive in and get to the top 10 list. The first one I would pick is not going to be surprising to people who know my channel, The Wind in the Willows. This is one of my favorite children's books. It's not particularly long, so it kind of goes against my initial criteria there. But the reason I would choose this is because this book is comforting. This book reminds me of home. This book reminds me of peace. And I think that the story is so deep and resonant that it will be something that I could read and reread. I've already read it multiple times over the course of a year and not gotten tired of reading it. So I think this is one that I would absolutely love to have on my shelf for, I guess, on my wooden shelf or whatever I would make my shelf out of on the desert island for the rest of my life. Wind in the Willows is a beautiful story about these anthropomorphized animals that are basically going on a journey. They're trying to correct their friend Mr. Toad, who has all sorts of shenanigans, and get him back on the straight and narrow. And I think that story would just be so fun to read and reread over the course of a lifetime. So the first one I would choose for my desert island book would be The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. And it's going to get better from here. So that's the first one. The second one I would choose, now I did mention Jane Austen. I would have to pick a Jane Austen novel. I would choose Pride and Prejudice, even though Sense and Sensibility might be my favorite Jane Austen novel for its philosophical themes and its sense of constancy, which I really value. I think Pride and Prejudice is probably the superior novel in terms of writing. Emma, it might even be even better, but Emma's character is not particularly likable. I mean, different people have different views on it, but for me, I would want to be with someone that I could see myself with for the rest of my life. You know, in the case of Darcy, in the case of the Bennets, I really enjoy these families. I like the characters, even though they're not like explicitly likable all throughout. They become likable, and I think I could read and reread this many times over the course of a lifetime. I would choose this version if I could, because it's an annotated version. If I can cheat a bit and choose annotated versions for all the books, I think I would. It just gives me a little bit more perspective. Although maybe I wouldn't, because, you know, do I really want to be reading and rereading kind of a critic's view on a book if I only have 10 books? On second thought, I don't think I would take the annotated versions. I would just take the original versions, because then it would allow my own mind to creatively read and reread and reinterpret given my circumstances. But the second book I would choose would be Pride and Prejudice. A third one is one that is another thick book, another big one, another one that I think would take a while to read, although if you're on an island, you don't have much else to do, you might end up reading this many times, and it's such an enjoyable and quick read. The Count of Monte Cristo. I say quick read not in the sense of how many pages it is, it's like 1,200 pages or something like this. But once you start reading, it's gripping, it's riveting, it'll get you going and get you continuing to read. The Count of Monte Cristo is a really great one, really fun. Alexandre Dumas is just such a brilliant writer. The moral themes in here are excellent. His other books are good too. Like I was talking recently about the Three Musketeers, but I wouldn't choose that as my desert island pick because that one is not so substantial and it's a little bit more, I think, superficial feeling. This one feels deeper and it has kind of a desert island theme in it, as it were. One would think if I would choose a desert island book, I mean, this is definitely one I would choose, that I should choose something explicitly desert island themed, like Robinson Crusoe, where he's trapped on a desert island, or the Swiss Family Robinson, or even something like, Lord of the Flies, which is a great book as well. Even The Alchemist is one that I think a lot of people would probably come up with, but none of those are on my list. Those are just, I guess, bonus extras, if you will. I wouldn't choose them because I'm already on a desert island. I don't know if I would be looking for someone else who has had that experience to kind of compare and contrast mine with. If I would, maybe Robinson Crusoe would be my pick, but I like Robinson Crusoe a lot. I don't know if I would want to reread it my entire life, particularly since a lot of the other books I've already chosen on this list are quite meaningful and deep, and they're not superficial. The next one that I would pick as my, what is this, 1, 2, 3, fourth pick would be 1001 Nights, or Arabian Nights is maybe the other term that you've heard of it. It's a collection of particularly Middle Eastern, but also the stories, some of them initiate from China and India, but they were all collected and kind of aggregated in the Middle East in the Middle Ages. It's almost like the greatest Middle Eastern folk tales. You have Aladdin and the Lamp is one of the famous ones from this collection, or Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. But there are so many others that are really just beautiful stories. And I think I would choose this because I want something that would contrast, that would be short stories. So I don't always have to be reading a big book. I could just pick a short story and the collection would have many short stories in it. I also thought of Chekhov's short stories. That would be another contender for a list like this. Just choose all the short stories of Chekhov because he is one of the great humanist writers, one of the great thinkers in the Russian experience, but I have another Russian pick on this list, so I thought I would choose this one to kind of give myself a bit more diversity on this list. And I love 1001 Nights. I love frame tale, Scheherazade, and that idea that, I don't know if you're not familiar with it, basically the idea is she's marrying this crazy king who kills a woman every night after his wife cheats on him. He basically just kills a woman every night. But what she does is she marries him, she tells him part of a story, and then just before she gets to the end, she says, if you want to hear the rest, you have to hear it next night. And so he keeps her alive, and he keeps her alive. And after 1001 Nights, that's the premise, is that he decides, okay, I'm not going to kill her anymore. But that is the frame story, and then within it, you get all these wonderful tales. You don't get 1,000 tales, unfortunately. That would be nice for a desert island, but we do get a lot of wonderful tales. Now, speaking of Russian novels, the next one I would choose on my list would be War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Now, this is a bit of a cheat. I initially thought when I was making this list, I would just choose 10 books I've never read that I've had highly recommended, so that they would be books I've never read, and I would be able to read at least 10 more books in my life before I move on. And that would be one way to make a list like this. It would kind of make sense, but I think we're also seeking familiarity when we're answering the desert island question. It's not really about, if you could only read 10 more books, which books would you read? It's about which 10 books would you want to reread and reread if you could. So I thought I'd stay faithful to that. But the reason I chose War and Peace is because I would choose Anna Karenina, one of my favorite novels, one of the greatest novels ever written. But I don't think I would want to reread that story. I think that story is too dark for me to reread indefinitely. I think War and Peace is more sprawling, more of a historic epic. I've read a small part of it, so it kind of counts. And I've read enough Tolstoy to know and trust his intuition here. So I think I would choose War and Peace as my novel that I've not really fully read, or I've read only a small part of, because rather than Anna Karenina, which is, maybe I would put Anna Karenina in like a top 10 list over War and Peace, although I haven't read it yet, so who knows. But this is one I would choose more for the wanting to be on a desert island for the rest of my life. Before I get to the last 5 on this list, I do briefly want to plug the Reading Room, which is the book club online that I have on Substack. We just finished reading Watership Down and Life and Fate Part 1 by Vasily Grossman. So we'll be finishing Life and Fate in August, and we'll be reading in August The Phantom Tollbooth by Norman Juster. So I'm really excited. It's a wonderful group of people that are very interested in reading, very interested in philosophy, going deep in the questions. And I learn a lot bouncing ideas off of people. We meet every month for live discussions, and there's a reading room, book club, resources that are all throughout the month, including reading guides and live streams and whatnot. So highly recommend, if you are interested in reading, that you check out the book club there. It's part of the joy of reading, right? You're discovering books. The problem I have is I always read these new books that are capable of completely changing my personal canon, my personal list. Probably in 2 months, I'll have read different books that now I will want to include on my desert island list, or I'll want to include on my top, adventure novels list. And so you're constantly evolving as a reader, and this is one of the beautiful things about being a reader and living the reading life. But yeah, we have the book club, and it's the best way to support the channel, so I highly recommend checking it out if you're interested. Top 5. Number 5. I'm actually not really ranking these on 10 being my lowest and 1 being my highest. These are just the last 5 of the list. I would choose the complete essays of Montaigne. And this is a bit of a deviation from fiction. So this list is primarily a fiction list. I kind of put out nonfiction and biography as not ones I would include, because then I thought, okay, this is an impossible list for me to make. But for me, the essays of Montaigne feel almost like they fit within this canon, even though they're a little bit outside. I also thought, what about poetry? Like, if we would start adding poetry to the list, maybe I would choose the poems of Robert Frost or Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. There's so many other great poetry collections. But if I'm focusing primarily on fiction, on novels, but I also am looking for some short stories and some collections, my essay collection would be Montaigne, because his view of human life and the human experience, first of all, it's long. There's lots of short essays you can read. There's one that will be relevant to every experience. And because of that, when I'm on the island, I could pick up an essay by Montaigne and be transformed by it. And I thought that is exactly what I'm looking for. So the complete essays of Montaigne. The next one I would choose would be, I don't know if you can see that, Don Quixote by Cervantes. So the reason I would choose this, I'd probably choose the Spanish language edition of it, because I do speak Spanish, and it would help me kind of keep my mind active. And obviously it's in the original language, so it's superior. It's always superior to read a book in its original language, unless it's a horribly written book that has a wonderful translator, maybe. But most books are better to read in their original language. And the reason I would choose this is because, first of all, it's the first novel, really. I mean, you could argue that the first novel would be The Tales of Genji or something, but this is the first modern novel, and it is a historic epic. It is also hilarious. It's so fun. It's I also have a short version here. I wouldn't choose this one. I just noticed that. Anyways, I would choose this as almost my comedy pick, if you will. And when you're on an island, I think you'd have to have a very active imagination if you're going to survive. If you're going to stay mentally active, you'd have to create things like Wilson. You'd have to create these imaginary worlds and not go crazy while you're doing it. And so I think having Don Quixote would help keep me sane, but it's also one of the greatest novels. It's super entertaining, super fun, long enough that it would be substantial, and it's got multiple stories within it. So it almost doesn't quite feel like a collection of short stories, but there are kind of nice sections that you could read. It doesn't feel like you have to, like when you're reading The Count of Monte Cristo, for example, you're going to be reading the whole thing and you're not going to be able to stop. And so that would be the next one I would choose in my list. Now our second to last pick would be the complete works of William Shakespeare. I feel like this one's cheating because this is just such an amazing choice, but there are books that are the complete works of William Shakespeare, so that counts as a book, right? This is also my poetry slash not fiction slash playwright pick, because you have all of Shakespeare's sonnets, as well as you have all of his other longer poems that are really amazing. And so he is not just a playwright, although he's most notable as a playwright. You get Hamlet, you get Macbeth, you get King Lear, you get Othello, you get A Midsummer Night's Dream, you get all the Henrys. You get so much in here, and you get all of the poems that are going to give you reflections on life and art and love and all these questions that you want answered. I think this is one that you could just read and reread it. Probably if I could only choose one, it would be this one. And I've excluded again from this book religious texts as well. Maybe the Bible would be another one that would easily be picked, but this would be my second to top pick. Now, my number one pick, not necessarily my favorite, but the top pick I would choose on this list would be Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is very nostalgic for me. It's a book that I've read many times. I love reading. I think the story is epic in scale and also extremely kind of approachable. It's fun. It's super enjoyable, and I think that it would be one that would bring me to tears, allow me to laugh, allow me to make meaning in my challenging circumstances and situation. And I would have Tolkien on my list. I realize this is not my top pick, actually. I do have one more. That's only 9 on the list. I miscounted. But Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Really, really wonderful book. Definitely one I would choose on my desert island pick. And then my top pick, my I keep saying top, my last pick on the list would be East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I don't think this is necessarily the greatest novel. If we're going to choose one modern 20th century novel, I don't necessarily think it's the most human novel. I don't necessarily think it's number one of anything, but for me, it's like top 5 on so many of the categories that I care about. It just ends up becoming one of those novels that I think just has such deep insight into the human experience, such deep insight into the nature of good and evil and forgiveness and freedom and loss and memory and just all of the questions that we have as human beings. And it also is so well written. Steinbeck is just gorgeous in his prose. I mean, I'm a huge fan as well of The Great Gatsby, of Hemingway. I'm a big fan of, The Odyssey. I just recently reread this. I'll do a talk hopefully soon about this in film. There's books like 1984 that I think are relevant when you're in society, but maybe not so relevant when you're out of society. But if I had to choose just one kind of more modern novel as my to fill that role on this list, it would have to be East of Eden for me. Such a beautiful story. Now, lots of honorable mentions. The Harry Potter series. If I could pick an entire series, I would probably choose this one just for nostalgic reasons. You can just see based on this is the last book in the series, how beat up it is, how many times I've read this. And so I think having books like that you grew up on are ones that would definitely make a great contender for this list. I would probably put the Harry Potter series on this list, maybe bumping one of the other choices if I could choose the whole series. But because it's 7 books, I don't really care to have one book from the series on the list. Maybe I would also choose like an anthology of drama. I would choose Shakespeare over this. I think Shakespeare alone, I think, is greater than all the other playwrights kind of together, but it's definitely a good case to make for an anthology of drama. Or maybe the collected works of Oscar Wilde. I love The Picture of Dorian Gray. I love Lady Windermere's Fan. I love The Importance of Being Earnest and a lot of his witticisms and aphorisms, but I don't think I would choose this. I think those are some of the ones that I would have on my list. David Copperfield as there's just too many to mention, but those are my top 10 that I did choose. The other ones are just bonuses, other things, just so that you're aware that this wasn't an easy list to make. So there you have it. Not necessarily my 10 favorites, but the 10 books that I would take on a complete desert island. I would love to hear yours. Which 10 books would you take? Which book do you think I left behind that you could never live without? The book that you think is absolutely essential. Obviously, I think Chesterton was probably right. After enough years on the island, I'll probably wish that I just chose the shipbuilding guide. But I'm a romantic, so I'm going to have to go with the literature on this one. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment, again, of your favorite books. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one.